Welcome to Mining Over Canada. Join the Canadian Securities Exchange and our partners in a first-hand look into our country's vast mining landscape.
Welcome to our latest edition of Mining Over Canada. This is week 4, and we are featuring the Northern Territories. I'm Anil with the Canadian Securities Exchange, and today I have a special guest. I'm talking to Ann Turner, and Ann has actually wears a couple of different hats. Ann is the Executive Director of both the Yukon Mining Alliance as well as Invest Yukon, and she's also the President of Yukon Women in Mining. And thank you so much for your time and joining us for Mining Over Canada. How are you?
I'm really good. Thanks for having me here. I think this will be a lot of fun.
It's going to be a great one. I know you and your team have been extremely busy over the last little while, hosting numerous virtual conferences. You guys just finished the virtual site series that you guys hosted?
Yeah, we just wrapped it up. It was a really kind of exciting project because it was all throughout the summer. We had to find a way to still connect investors with Yukon companies and get on the ground. And, I think even by June, we were already feeling Zoom fatigue. And so it was fun to get creative and find a new way to do it.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to jump on this with me right after you guys completed on another Zoom call. But we're going to have a fun conversation here. Obviously, we're highlighting the Northern Territories, but there is a lot of people that might not really know how much of a rich history the Yukon and the Northern Territories have when it comes to the mining space. You want to maybe talk a little bit about Yukon and Yukon Mining Alliance. What is the role there and what do you guys do? What's the vision?
Sure. So Yukon Mining Alliance, or as it's being, known more recently as is Invest Yukon, it's a collaboration of 18 mining companies in the Yukon, our leaders in exploration, development, and production, working alongside with Government of Yukon and other industry partners to connect investors directly with the Yukon story. A pretty innovative group came together in 2009 at the start of what was then a new gold rush, and things were really shifting in the territory at the time, and it became really imperative that we needed to accomplish two goals. One, to really demonstrate the companies that had history, experience, quality assets in the Yukon and separate those from, more of the capital that was just kind of flying in, more speculative, and make sure that we were highlighting companies that had good corporate relationships with communities and with companies and with the government, of course. The other part is we were really noticing that there seemed to be a lot of investor unawareness or lots of myths and misconceptions about what the Yukon is, what's here. A lot of people look back to our history of 1896 and the gold rush, and they're like, oh, that's kind of what the Yukon is, and then it never seemed to have evolved from there. So those were our two major goals when we started out, and then it just kind of kept growing. And we started with 5 members, and now we're at 18. And so it's been pretty exciting. We do try to do lots of innovative things, and most importantly, making sure that investors are genuinely connected to what's on the ground here.
Yeah, you and your team are very proactive. I mean, anybody watching that has been to any of the mining related conferences, whether it be PDAC or VRIC or any of the other ones that happen nationally and worldwide, you guys are a huge presence. You and your team are a big presence at all these shows. So it must be quite interesting.
It is, we do like to try and punch above our weight. So, it's a small jurisdiction, but I think where we really get the chance to stand apart is the level of collaboration in the Yukon, I think is unprecedented. In a lot of ways, naturally, I mean, can you imagine getting 18 companies who are all competing for capital to stand side by side and market not themselves, but each other, and talking about what's good for each other and what's good for the whole territory. And you really just get that sense when you're working with the Yukon group, and when you step into our Yukon pavilion at the Vancouver Resource Conference. That's really, I think, one of the biggest messages is that the Yukon is really committed to the industry. It's a part of our history and our culture, but it is definitely part of our economic fabric today and into our future. And I think that's kind of why we have that strategic advantage.
Yeah, your pavilions always do have a community feel to it, and it's a collective, like you said. Everybody goes out there with that same goal in mind, which is to promote the Yukon, basically, and as a whole, everybody wins. So let's talk a little bit about the history. Do you want to give us a a little history lesson.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm a born and raised Yukoner, so this is my history as much as anything, and it's so captivating, and there are so many good storytellers in the Yukon on the history. But of course, it really kicks off at the gold rush, the Klondike Gold Rush in 1896. One of my favorite pieces of history that's finally been recognized is Kate Carmack, or Schlattla, who was a Tagish citizen here in the Yukon, and she was just recognized as a Canadian Mining Hall of Fame inductee for her contribution in the discovery of gold in the Yukon. And I just feel that it's such an incredible piece of our story that an Indigenous woman was so foundational to the start of our industry, and that has kind of carried us through. So of course we've got the gold rush, 100,000 stampeders coming from all over, going over the most insane Chilkoot Pass, and down the rivers and forging things to end up in Dawson, which would become the second place in Canada to get electricity at the turn of the century. Like, the two places in Canada that had electricity, Montreal and Dawson City. Like, it's just so crazy that that's kind of where it all kicked off. There were the people that made money in the gold rush, and there were the people that made money off the people who were trying to make money off the gold rush. The latter probably did better. And then it just, I mean, this is how these things go, right? So by the time it kicks off, the ground's staked. And placer mining or alluvial gold is just such a really neat industry, and we're in hard rock, so we don't talk about it much, but it's a really key piece, not just to the history, but to how people even explore today in the gold space, right? Working with placer miners, and I mean, if there's placer in the creeks, it's usually coming from somewhere nearby, right? So there's that really unique dynamic here as well. And then people went from Dawson City at the turn of the century over to the Keno Hill district, which is obviously one of the most prolific and high-grade silver districts in North America and arguably the world. So you can see Alexco, carrying on that, and there were many companies at the turn of the century there as well. And then we had a new gold rush in 2010 when we started. Lots of projects and mines along the way, but I would say those are kind of our three big points in history.
Yeah, of course. Since we're talking about history, obviously you guys are, well, the Yukon itself, very pristine country, lots of rugged mountains and terrain. How has the infrastructure changed? Obviously not since the 1800s, but in the last 10 years.
Yeah. Well, we had electricity in 1900, and then it just went from there. So, the Yukon's infrastructure, I feel, is, changing and improving every single year. I think the North gets painted with a bit of a brush, probably a bit more of a brush of lack of information than anything. We have a hydro power grid here. It's been here since the 50s. Our two operating and one soon to be, are all on the power grid. There's more than 5,000 kilometers of government maintained roads. We've got, I don't know how many airports and aerodromes. So, for the North, I'd say the infrastructure is exemplary. I think, we really stand out in Canada and Canada's north that way. And we're just that much further ahead than our, neighbors who are advancing their infrastructure. What I really like, though, is the continued commitment that we're seeing. So obviously, the Prime Minister and the Premier announced the Resource Gateway project a few years ago. And you see, as agreements are confirmed with the First Nations in those communities, those road projects are getting approved and moving forward. So there was one, it was actually at PDAC this year, where our Minister of Economic Development and Energy, Mines and Resources announced over 70 million for a road that goes to Fireweed Zinc and into that region. And that comes because of the relationships and the agreements with the community. And there are others that have announced, the ones that go into more of the Casino and Northern Free Gold area, and of course the gold fields through Dawson. And so these are all key areas of Yukon to open up through infrastructure. We need to stay on it, to stay really committed. It's going to be one of our best strategic long-term advantages, is to continue to enhance our infrastructure, and doing that with First Nation communities and the government is critical.
Absolutely. And then as this infrastructure is built and comes in, I mean, it obviously probably first comes in for the mining company, but over the years and as that infrastructure is built, I'm assuming it benefits a lot of the communities and a lot of other industries as well that can then take advantage of what's been put in, whether it's power or roads.
Yeah, and I think that's been the case for infrastructure development since the beginning, of infrastructure development. If I look back at, more towards the mid 1900s when different mines were in operations, at that time, there was a railway, the White Pass Railway that connected, through the Yukon and out to Skagway. But it was the result of mining that they actually decided to build a road to Skagway. Well, Skagway, we call it Yukon's port, obviously. It's Alaska's. That probably just goes to our amazing relationship with the municipality of Skagway in Alaska. If it weren't for mining, we wouldn't have that road to Skagway. And honestly, it's one of my favorite tourist drives. I love going to Skagway and visiting the community, and you go and hike the Chilkoot. And, that's where it started for Yukon. And I think that continues, right? Anytime we responsibly develop different areas, there's, you have to manage and make sure that you're protecting the wilderness around. This is my home. It's for many of these companies, this is their home. So there's the balance to be struck, and you do have to really make sure you're working with the communities on that. But the infrastructure is critical, and it benefits everyone, especially when we're talking about power or even other social constructs of infrastructure and resources that can go to communities.
Yeah, absolutely. I did read mining is actually one of the largest private contributors for communities in the Yukon. Why has mining been so important? Obviously, the gold rush and all of that, but let's talk a little bit about the geological potential. Are you able to comment on that? Some of the stuff people should really know about what the potentials are?
Yeah, I'm going to qualify it by saying I'm not a geologist. So, I can't speak to the rocks specifically, but certainly I think one of the things that's exciting about Yukon is the diversity of the minerals that are here. So, everything from obviously the gold where we started, the major silver districts, just huge copper gold deposits. You've got Casino, you've got Minto that's operating now as a copper gold mine. We've got a tungsten mine on our border with NWT. And obviously, the big lead zinc, right, with fireweed and others. So, that's an incredible amount of diversity. And it's one of those exciting things where it's, Yukon, being more north, being more restricted than, say Nevada, which is quite easy to explore, 12 months of the year. Yukon is largely underexplored. So we've just got these massive district scale land packages in these companies where that typically would be held by 5, 10, 15 companies, each throwing a few million at it. But because it's still fairly early for Yukon in its exploration life cycle, there's just so much opportunity. And it's really interesting to see how much companies are learning about even how to explore in Yukon and how to change that. I don't know if you follow White Gold, but their White Gold district, if you talk to Sean Ryan, also has a great history, starts as a mushroom picker, is an epic researcher, and really came to understand the district in that there's not enough outcrop here to be looking that way and to be exploring that way. So I think he calls it a tulip planter, and using that to do soil samples and just getting hundreds of thousands of soil samples just to try and understand the science, and then having to choose basically between these targets of interest, which when I listen to him, I feel like he's trying to choose between 5 favorite children, and he's going, which kid is the most promising today. And I feel like that's kind of the epitome of the geological potential is all of it is great. You're just so excited about all of it, and you just have to be really smart with the money because it's all really big, and we got a long way to go.
Absolutely. And obviously the government of Yukon is very proactive when it comes to investing and supporting the mining community as well.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, why don't you talk to us a little bit about, what are some of the steps that they've taken to be able to be proactive and encourage this type of investment and support?
Well, the government participates, I think, at every level of, where you'd want an investor to, right from, the infrastructure, which has to be critically aligned with First Nation relationships. When they signed a new mining MOU, and so really with the First Nations. And so that was really critical in just, re-enhancing that relationship and the importance of it. There's a great relationship between our premier and the Grand Chief, and keeping those open lines of communication. We've just reinitiated the Yukon Mineral Development Strategy, which is actually more in the wrap-up stages now. And that's to look at the system holistically and see where we are, where we've been, and where we'd like to go. And that, all Yukoners are participating in that, all companies, levels of government are involved in that. And I think that's going to be really exciting to see what we're looking for going forward. So the government's obviously investing in the Invest Yukon brand and connecting, and of course they do their own outreach, right? They directly connect with majors and influential investors as well to make sure that they're aware of the government's commitment to the industry.
You mentioned was it the strategy that you just mentioned? Are you able to talk a little bit about what are some of the key factors that you're looking to implement in the strategy?
So that's an independent panels process. So, from our perspective at Yukon Mining Alliance, one of the key parts of the strategy for us would be continuing to connect with investors, and making sure that, they're getting information as quickly as they can, as accurately as they can from industry and government, and making sure that, we have that alignment, and, creating that environment of certainty around that. But the mineral development strategy, as I understand it, it's the whole holistic system, right? It's going to be everything from how, Yukoners participate in the sector, how we access land, how we develop infrastructure, what are some things that we want to improve on, what are some things that need to change, and what are we doing really well. And they're just wrapping the what we heard part, so that hasn't come out yet, and so I think that'll be exciting to hear, but I think there's a big effort to all pull forward, and to make sure. And I think one of the things that we've got an advantage of, and we talked about this a little bit at PDAC, the biggest thing being said, or the biggest acronym of the year, I felt, was ESG. And so we dived into ESG and kind of did a little, back of the napkin on Yukon. And we went, well, we've been doing the fundamentals or the values or the metrics of ESG for the better part of 2, 3, 4 decades. Like, that's built into who we are, because as a northern community or northern region, we need each other. So the environment is critical to us. Our relationships with each other are critical to us, whether that's Indigenous or other types of diversity in the industry, women, all kinds of things. So, and I think that is one of the things that's pretty powerful about the Yukon, is we live and breathe that, those ESG metrics.
Absolutely. And then so those are already ingrained in you guys. So as the rest of the industry sort of is catching up, you guys can be the trendsetters, even, as you might want.
Yeah, we didn't know that was what it was called, but we were doing it.
Good. Speaking of PDAC, so we were all together at PDAC earlier this year in March. Totally different time, a little bit of a different vibe. I'm glad that we were all able to be there face to face. But how have you guys, not only your team, but the communities in Yukon, been coping with this pandemic that the world is dealing with?
Yeah, well, it was great to be at PDAC. It was the last show of the year for us, and it all went really well, which was wonderful. Coming home was really interesting. This is, again, an advantage of being in the north, is we've had very little COVID cases, right? So from a health and safety perspective, we're extremely fortunate. We had, the other thing is, when you've got a heavy government group as well as a heavy industry, whether that's construction or mining, health and safety is built into our culture to such an extreme way that as soon as you get COVID, everyone kind of put up their hands and said, how can we make sure that we can continue to work, continue to support the communities and people who need jobs and need stability, but with the absolute priority of protecting Yukoners and communities and anyone who's within. And I think that was really powerful to see looking back. The fact that we were able to have our operating mines continue to operate and to really innovate and reach out and to provide even additional support, going, this is working for us, and we've added these additional medical resources or these ONH strategies, and sharing. You just saw companies and government sharing information really openly about the best path forward. So the operating mines, Minto and Victoria Gold, kept operating, which was great. Certainly, there was a financial impact on them to do so. And, we all prioritize the health and safety. So that was what it was. And we're very fortunate to be in the position we are. We were delayed into the exploration season. And I think it was kind of like everyone standing at a start line, everyone prepping, everyone doing research, everyone preparing what they could, and just trying to hire as many Yukoners as they possibly could. Once our BC Yukon bubble was created, as many Yukon and BC. And so you saw this doubling down on our commitment to hire local and to really, go those extra levels. And so many companies have to be like, okay, well, when are you going to be done with the drill at your site? Because we, want to move it to our site. And so when the gun kind of went off, I would say on July 1st, everyone was so prepared with, really great strategies and really great health protocols. And then it was like, can we move these drills as fast as possible? Because we had a really big season and there's still companies drilling today. So, definitely a long season for us. And though some will go to the end of November here. But yeah, I'd say Yukon has done really well and I'm very proud.
There's a certain part of the year where you guys get a lot of sunshine as well. What is it, like 20 something hours of sunshine or sunlight?
All of it. Depends. I mean, the further north you go, the more you're getting. So, anyone who's kind of out in the Klondike will just kind of watch the sun go like that, on the longest days. It just doesn't get that dark. So even if it's, the sun is not actually in the sky, it's.
But there's enough light to continue working and be on site. And then, so the reason why I ask these questions is I've never actually visited Yukon or Alaska, and they're both on my bucket list. And they're just like one of those, the last wilderness, basically, everybody wants to check it out. I was on your website, Anne, and I seen that you guys talk quite a bit about the Made in Yukon process. You want to maybe educate us a bit more, myself and our audience included, on what the mandate of this Made in Yukon process is?
Yeah, so the Made in Yukon process refers largely to our regulatory system. When Yukon went through devolution around, I think it's 2002, I'm gonna hopefully not get the dates too wrong, but what was critical about that was land claim agreements with Yukon First Nations. And as part of those land claim agreements and self-governing agreements, this process or regulatory regime known as the YESEB, Yukon Environmental Socioeconomic Act, and then board, that would be where everything would be assessed and recommended. And so it's a tri-party thing that involves the federal government, the territorial government, and Yukon First Nations, with the public and industry participating and feeding into it. And so, out of the gate here, for the last 20 years, we've had a system that includes everybody and creates that opportunity for really effective feedback and processes. And, like any new system, it needs continuous evaluation and improvements. And I think that that's a big focus. But what is important is that that process is here in the Yukon, involves Yukoners for Yukon companies. Obviously, it's that, cities and municipalities participate in it. If you want to build a new driveway to your yard, you go through that process too. So it is the entire environmental assessment process for Yukon. And so, yeah, that's what we mean by Made in Yukon. It was made by Yukoners, and I think, really critical to that is it's a result of the umbrella final agreements with Yukon First Nations.
Perfect. And I don't think we can have this conversation without talking about the role of the First Nations and the First Nations communities when it comes to the mining sector, Yukon and the Northern Territories. So can you talk to us a little bit about how your groups work proactively with the First Nation communities as well as the governments?
Sure. I mean, the companies and the government work very closely with the communities. I mean, there's nothing that's done without those conversations, without that collaboration. It's a feedback loop constantly. For us, our job is to communicate what's happening as Invest Yukon, right? So we don't participate in lobbying or advocacy or those pieces. There are other exemplary parties that do that kind of thing, like our Chamber of Mines and our Yukon Producers Group, and obviously the government, the territorial government itself. What has been really interesting for us is ensuring the opportunity to highlight how critical the First Nation role is and what it means. Yukon is pretty unique even in Canada with 11 settled First Nations. And at one point, that was more even when I started in 2010, we used to say, that made up almost half of the settled and self-governing First Nations in Canada. So I think, Yukon has definitely blazed a trail in that regard. For anyone who blazes a trail, you're going to learn the lessons first and fastest and sometimes hardest. And I think that's a really great advantage as well, right? Like we get to be out of the gate and learning from each other. And more recently, acknowledging the role of Kate Carmack and her family and the other Klondike discoverers, right? Like Yukon First Nations are pivotal to the kickoff and the start of the gold rush and have been the entire way along. And, I think it's just really important for the investment community and for Canadians and Yukoners to know that our partnerships and our relationships are part of our core values. And we only move forward together.
I think that's a very important message to get out there, and that everyone should kind of work towards that same collective goal. I did speak, I mentioned to you, with Peter Johnston, who is the Grand Chief of the Council of Yukon First Nations yesterday. He did echo a lot of the similar sentiment that you're talking about right now. And what about the how does Invest Yukon work with the youth within the communities? Because the reason why I asked this question, Anne, is, obviously when you talk to a lot of the younger generation and the younger people, mining holds this very negative impression that they have when it comes to mining. So what do you guys do that's so proactive that goes out there to encourage younger people to look at mining, its practices, how sustainable it is, and then encourage them to carry on this tradition?
Yeah, so again, I mean, it's not a key part, our mandate is to connect to investors, but what I think has been really exciting is that we looked at what we called our virtual Yukon tool that we were developing, and part of it was through Verify, their technology company, and, on-site tours, this is 3 or 4 years ago. And what we did is we looked at what tools can we create that connect investors to the message, but can that tool also then be used by the community or companies to share information with communities and youth? And so that you've got that opportunity for that information stream to be going in both directions. This was actually a conversation that I'd had with the Grand Chief a few years ago. While we're promoting Yukon, it's really critical to make sure that Yukoners, Yukon First Nations know what we're promoting. So we had that conversation, which was really great to have and to bring that perspective. So the Invest Yukon virtual Yukon tool, it's through the Verify app, and it's also on our website. And you can essentially, from your desk today or from the app, go log in and, you'll get the satellite map of Yukon. Then you can click through and you can visit all of the Yukon communities and see a satellite image. We've highlighted a few key areas in each community, the infrastructure for it, and then added videos. And then we took that tool and lent it or partnered with Yukon Women in Mining, which there goes the double hat game for me. Yep. Right, so taking that tool out to Yukon Wim, who created something called Yukon Mining Days, which is essentially a combination of an exploration camp, if you can turn that into a traveling circus of incredibly passionate professionals to our industry. We go to a community, set up at a school, and then host, 30 to 40 interactive educational activities, talk about careers all the way from kindergarten. And, it would go to grade 12 during the day. And then you'd see the community come out. And so you'd see, all the big kids all the way up to 85 and older, getting engaged in the industry we were talking about. And I think, that's more Yukon Women in Mining and the Yukon Chamber of Mines are very active in that engagement with youth. And communicating with them, and the Klondike Placer Miners Association as well for the placer side. So we're lending support where we can with the tools that we create with investors. But I think that's kind of each of us plays a role in connecting youth and Yukoners.
Perfect. So, and I'm glad that you brought up a little bit about the role of the Yukon Women in Mining. Talk to us a little bit about that. So you're the president of this initiative. How did it come about? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm actually also the founder as well. This is something that, I'm very passionate about, and, have the great privilege of being the president this year and for the last few years. Back in, I think it was 2011, 2012, I was approached by a couple colleagues of mine, male colleagues that I'd known in the industry for quite some time. And they said, oh, you're headed to PDAC. Have you been to the Women in Mining Canada international reception that they host? I was like, no, I've never heard of this. And so, I went to that and I talked to all of the branch leaders and the head of the organization then. And then I came home and I kind of started looking at my path in the industry and what led me to being in mining. And it was, the more I did that, I was like, oh, okay, so I grew up in the Yukon, know the history. My parents work in Indigenous economic development and community development. My father is just incredible in leading the way on reclamation before it was, such a key part. He was doing it since, the 70s, creating the first Indigenous native seed collections and nurseries and that kind of thing. And so I grew up in this industry. My family, my grandfather and great-grandfather are tin miners in Africa and Cornwall. And at no point did I consider mining a career for me. So all the way through school, high school, went off to university, it's the biggest economy here. And no one ever mentioned it to me as something I could do. And not even my family. Right. And it wasn't something people were talking about as an opportunity. And so here I am in 2012, meeting these other women in the industry and realizing that there is a significant disconnect between the values that we hear publicly and the values that are real in the sector and the opportunities that it brings. And it just felt to me like it was so critical to start connecting Yukon youth and Yukon women with what the mining and exploration industry is today, and what that means, and that you don't have to leave the Yukon to go and find a valuable career, something that challenges you and rewards you and pays well, and that the diversity of it. And I lived in a number of Yukon First Nation communities growing up, and it always kind of bothered me that there was this real push back then to get that your only opportunity was to get out, whether that's Whitehorse or a community. You were being encouraged to leave the Yukon, and that was like the greatest achievement. And I really wanted to switch that because I love it here. I'm extremely passionate about the Yukon and about the industry. So that was the pivotal moment for me in founding Yukon Women in Mining, was really just making sure people knew that they could work and live here and really enjoy it and find it rewarding, particularly in the communities, because the cultural component and staying connected to your family is so important. And mining offers that. It's one of the only really strong jobs outside of government that you have in communities. So that's kind of where Yukon Women started for me.
Yeah. And so if we have anybody watching that might be interested in finding out more about what Yukon Women in Mining does and getting in touch with you, where would they go?
Yukonwim.ca, so yukonwim.ca. There's Women in Mining Canada. They're great. So no matter where you are in Canada, you can connect with someone. And that is one of the I think coolest things about the industry, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, even being at PDAC's like the biggest version of our family. But at all these conferences, mining is a family business at its core. And, we move from company to company, but always within kind of the same family. And it feels like you're just kind of changing houses. And then you come back, and, I love that. And honestly, I miss it. I miss my extended family so much. You're all in, Zoom pods around the world right now. I can't wait to get back out to see all of you.
We feel the exact same way, and hopefully, as we get past all of this pandemic and masks and all that stuff, we can all get back together and have a glass of wine, coffee, whatever it might be, a hug, a handshake, all that good stuff that we're so used to.
I look forward to hugging people again. If I have to wear a mask to do it, I will. But
we were all at PDAC, and there was rumblings of COVID, and no one actually thought that a week later we would all be working from home for the last 9 months.
Yeah, we came home from PDAC. Yukon Women in Mining actually had an event then with John McConnell of Victoria Gold, and he said on the stage that day, I think this might be the last presentation I do, and it was March 10th, and that was it. We were done, and I was just like, I'm glad we got it in, and it was a very safe event, but we're looking forward to seeing people.
Absolutely. Speaking of events, and the last one that anybody was presenting at in person, so you guys have switched your role a little bit. Everybody's live events have now gone virtual. I mentioned earlier you guys hosted the virtual site series that was this week and just wrapped up. So what's next? What are you guys working on next?
Well, what's next? Oh my, that was, so incredible to do, and it just consumed our lives for the last 6 months. We fortunately, we'd been shifting to a digital strategy for the last 18 months, before COVID happened. And we'd intended to launch that way this year and be kind of 50% virtual, 50% in person. So we were well positioned. I wasn't anticipating taking our Yukon property tour and conference virtual. That's the one where we bring qualified investors, analysts, and media to the Yukon, and they can visit up to 10 sites, meet with 20 companies, meet with government, meet with Yukon First Nation leaders in business and in government. So figuring out how to make that experience, which just really connects you to the history, connects you to our collaboration. How do you take that and put that in? It's it's not something that should be online. And so we were really lucky. We decided right away to do a documentary style virtual tour to try and give you the on the ground experience. We had, I think it was 6 days before the first site visit to plan it. So we definitely made things up as we went along, and really proud. We put 13 virtual site visits together. We ran a conference with them. We really didn't want to be competing with any of our partners in terms of the great conferences that they host. So it wasn't about hosting corporate presentations. It wasn't about one-on-one meetings. It was really about trying to show you what it's like to explore on the ground here. And we're going to release those videos at the end of October here, and then communicate them through November. So up next, we got a lot of content. We spent many days. I think it was a total of 32 days in the field this summer, 13 sites and all around Yukon communities as well. And so for us, it's going to be about creating that on the ground feeling and really just trying to connect investors with what it's like to be in the Yukon. I think it's a great opportunity. And the industry is really, I think at this point, trying to encourage the more generalized investor, the more retail, and connect with them. And the millennial investor was kind of the catchphrase at PDAC as well. That's been on our radar for the past 2 years. And I think we do that through, the tools and techniques that they use. And there's some really cool stuff we're looking forward to highlighting.
Perfect. So 2 things, Anne. You mentioned the site series. The videos will be available in the next little while. Where can one go to view these? Will they be available on the Invest Yukon website?
Yeah, so they'll be at investyukon.ca. Kitco is sharing them now for the next quite a while. There's some interviews there that Michael McRae of Kitco did with some companies. It's on the SIX platform as well, our conference site. So honestly, I think they'll be everywhere is our goal.
We'll make sure to add a link into the show notes here. Now, my second question was, you mentioned millennial investors, which is sort of like the hot topic for everybody right now.
Yeah.
But millennial investors typically look at mining as like from a step away, because everything they hear about, it's negative. What they don't realize is that if it's not mined, if it's not grown, it's mined. And literally all of the daily products that they use have some sort of an element that comes from mining in it. So my question to you, Anne, is what would you say to millennial investors that shy away from the mining space? What is your words of encouragement, and why should they be so bullish on the sector?
Yeah, well, my first message is to the mining industry, and we got to own our past. We really, really just need to acknowledge that there were some big lessons to be learned, but when lots of those major mistakes were made, we didn't have regulatory systems. We didn't have environmental review processes. One of the things I talk to communities and kids about, and so talking to millennial investors about, just to give them a sense of it, is when some of these mines were in operation, that was at a point in history where the concept of littering hadn't been invented yet, right? Where, recycling wasn't a thing, right? So if you're a millennial investor, our age, and you grow up and you just recycle, you do these things, right? They're built into it's like wearing a seatbelt, right? I always wear a seatbelt, but I can hear, my grandfather's voice being like, I don't need to wear a seatbelt, right? And so there's
the scotch in his hand.
I know, right? You're like, okay, well, millennial investors, I think, need to recognize that, history is history, and we've come a long way and a lot has changed. But in order for them to do that, industry has to own where we've been and just has to be really honest and genuine about what's changed and be proactive in their communications. I think we're still, as an industry, quite hesitant to communicate and to connect authentically. And millennials, doesn't matter the topic, authentic, genuine connection is it. Like you have to be believable, you have to be honest, you have to demonstrate that integrity. And the industry has it. We just need to do a lot better job of sharing that and being willing to talk about ourselves and where we're at, and celebrating, achievements. Quite often we'll just do things and then be like, oh, we don't need to tell anyone that amazing thing that we did. Yeah. And so, that one's going to be a two-way street in terms of bringing millennials in. But I'd say, for millennials, actually get connected to someone. It's like any issue. If you really want to understand it, and if you're going to put your money into it, get involved in something, get someone who's a friend who's in the industry that can speak to it authentically, because they're going to give you their honest opinion about it. And it's, ESG, connecting them with that message and what that means will be pivotal in kind of pulling the whole industry and then the investment community along with it.
Yeah, that's a great message. And I want to add to that by saying, also attending and being part of events, whether they be virtual like your site series and learning more, or in person like PDAC, going there, meeting the people, getting to know them. It might be a little nerve-wracking in the beginning, but as you go to more of these, as we've all learned, you get more comfortable, you get to know the people, and those conversations become a lot easier, and you're getting the knowledge that you need, especially these days when everything's at your fingertips. It's so easy to find out these details. So I really like that you bring up those messages. I'm going to leave the floor with you for the last little bit with any message that you want to put out to our viewers, listeners, anybody that might come across this content on, why people should be paying attention to mining and mining practices in Canada, and specifically the Yukon.
It was like my favorite topic. I could do this all day.
More than fun.
Yeah, if anything, hopefully through this I've conveyed my passion and interest for the sector. It's at my core. This is my family, and I would never be engaged in something that didn't fundamentally fit the values of my community. And I think that is what I would take away. The industry is very holistic, it's very diverse. everything from the accountants in Vancouver working on it to environmental scientists and monitors to the CEOs marketing, hopefully back around the world again. There's just so many different ways to participate. And the only way that we continue to advance the industry and continue, to attract investors and to encourage communities to participate is by having authentic conversations and sharing information and really recognizing the critical role that mining plays in our daily lives, but in our communities. One of the things we looked at when COVID happened was, if we don't have exploration this year, what does that mean to school sponsorships? How many sports teams won't get money this year? How many, charities are going to miss out, right? Like, because you can't host fundraisers in the same way. And so, I see the industry trying to pivot and regardless of what the balance sheet was doing, I saw industry step up and say, no matter what happens, we have a commitment to the community, and that's going to come before this and before that. And investors and community, I think that's so critical to understanding where we're at. Like we saw the Victoria Gold Student Encouragement Society charity, it raised $110,000 in a virtual event. We did have a safe live event here for it as well, a small live event. And I just think, we're in such a good place as an industry, and we're so committed to advancing it and to continuing to do better. And, I'm loving the trailblazing. I'm loving, the positive one-upmanship of, well, I can do that better again and again and again.
I think that's a great message there. If anybody wanted to follow you guys on social media, where do they find you?
We are at Invest Yukon on all of the platforms. So very simple. We're investyukon.ca or at Invest Yukon on, YouTube, social media, Twitter, all of it, LinkedIn. And watch for those virtual tour videos. That is going to be the funnest way. And, they're just so epically, we just worked with such a cool team to put them together. Part of me expects like a transformer to drop out of the sky in some of them, just because they're like the scenes and the places we get to explore are just, out of this world, amazing. And, these people are super passionate and talented.
Yeah. And we really appreciate your passion for the mining industry, for encouraging women in mining, all the stuff that you guys do at the different conferences to help build our industry and to create more education around these topics and issues. This has been Ann Turner. Ann is the Executive Director of Invest Yukon and the Yukon Mining Alliance. And she's also the founder and president of Yukon Women in Mining. And we really appreciate your time. I look forward to when we can all meet in person again, but until then, it's going to be virtual. I'll definitely look out for the virtual site series as well. And this has been another edition of CSC's Mining Over Canada, week 4, presenting the Northern Territories. I'm Anil Mall. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.